Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Rent Prep for Landlords. This is episode number 283. I'm going to be doing an In the News podcast here today. We're going to be talking about bed bugs, lying about emotional support animals, and a issue that kind of arose from the California rent law eviction loophole, they're calling it. We're going to get to all of these stories real quick today, right after this.
Welcome to the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. And now your hosts, Stephen White and Eric Worrell.
All right. So in order of how I introduced them on the opening of today's podcast, the first thing we're going to be talking about are bed bugs. So an article from why.org, which is actually WHY, the letter Y.org. The title says, should landlords be responsible for a bed bug infestation? New bill passes remediation costs to tenants. So this is from Jake Blumgart on October 22nd. This was written. So this isn't a national law, it's a local law, but another good example of why keeping up in your local laws is important. And it said that Philadelphia's fight against bed bugs took one tiny itchy step forward Tuesday with a city council committee passage of a bill aimed at reducing the city's vulnerability to nasty house guests. So I learned something new today. Apparently, Philly is leading the country in bed bugs. Said it's one of the only major U.S. cities that doesn't currently use city law to guard against the critters. And they found in a 2014 study that about 11% of homes in the South Philadelphia zip code have been affected by bed bugs. So probably not the most exciting place to rent or live in general if 1 out of 10 homes have been affected by bed bugs. But the bill that advanced would hold landlords responsible for ridding rental properties of the bed bugs if the critters are discovered within 90 days of a lease's commencement. But after the 90-day window closes, tenants would share the cost of remediation, a landlord-friendly amendment to the bill that tenant advocates and others say will make regulation less effective. So I thought this was kind of interesting to share that in this particular city, what they're trying to do is push it through that first 90 days, it's on the landlord. And then after 90 days, it's a split. It doesn't mention what that split would be. And maybe they're still trying to figure that out. But like I mentioned before, another example of why keeping up on your local laws and understanding that, and also not just jumping to conclusion on something. Because let's say this is the law in your area and a tenant complains about bed bugs and you can say, okay, that's fine. We can take care of that, but you're going to pay for it. Well, keep up on your local law because maybe it's on you. Maybe it is on the tenant. Maybe it's split in this particular case. So that is coming down in Philly right now and being debated. The next in the news story I wanted to highlight here comes from mlive.com. And I don't think we do have an author, Lauren Gibbons. And the title of this is Lying to Landlords About Emotional Support Animals Would Be a Crime Under Michigan House Bills. I know a few listeners' ears probably just perked up on that one. Falsely declaring a pet an emotional support animal so they can live in a rental property would be a misdemeanor under a pair of bills debated in the Michigan House this week. It's sponsored by two state representatives, Matt Hall and Sarah Cambenzi. That's probably how you say that. And the two bills would allow landlords to request a notarized proof from a tenant's healthcare provider that a person has legitimate need for an emotional support animal. If a person falsely represented their pet as an emotional support animal, the landlord could evict them from the property and could be charged with a misdemeanor offense punishable by up to 90 days imprisonment, a fine of up to $500, and up to 30 days community service. So I hear that right there, and I'm like, there's no way that they're ever going to convict somebody and throw them into jail for 90 days for a fake emotional support animal, because that would just make news like crazy. Could you imagine somebody like has a kitten in a rental property, and it comes out that they faked the ESA documentation and they end up in jail for 3 months? But I understand why they probably are doing it this way. Maybe they're trying to go pretty bold with it and they'll get dialed back to like, all right, it can be a $250 fine and, a day of community service or something. But it seems kind of crazy on that end. But at the same time, I kind of like the idea of it. talked about emotional support animals a lot. I try not to bring it up too much because it's definitely one of those touchy subjects that, it's pretty easy to go off on a tangent about. But having any kind of law that's going to reduce fakes and also give attention to the people that actually need these service animals, or I should say emotional support animals, I think is a great thing. So it says that the healthcare providers providing the documentation would need to have treated the person for at least 6 months prior to the documentation request and maintain a physical office space, love that, among other requirements. And a provider misrepresenting a tenant's need for an emotional support animal could also be charged with the misdemeanor. So I love the fact that they need a physical office space, so it's not just like somebody who started the website to get an emotional support letter, and they actually have really no business doing that. And it's interesting, too, that they're looking at possibly filing a misdemeanor charge on the business if they don't comply. This legislation would not impact service animals because they're a separate entity trained to perform functions for their owners and are classified differently from emotional support animals, as we all know. Of course, there are people that are arguing that there's a big problem with this, and you're going to get both sides coming at it. But so far, it sounds like it has a lot of supporters, and it'll be interesting to hear what happens with this. I think if they can pass something in one state, like a lot of times we see, then all of a sudden you see it pop up in another state, and yeah, we will see how this one goes. Hopefully, we can keep up on this one and keep you guys in the loop. And I'm sure if you're in Michigan, that one's definitely very, very interesting to you. All right, our last in the news story here. It comes from a website, therealdeal.com. I feel like I've been actually sourcing a few articles on them lately. Good for them. They have been putting out some good content. The article, I felt like I was kind of being disingenuous when I said that. Good for them. It's like when somebody says, good for you, especially when they use that tone. You're like, oh, okay, thanks. Doesn't really feel like a compliment, though. Good for you. Not great for me, but good for you. Anyways, I digress. This article comes from Dennis Lynch. It was published. Maybe they don't put their published dates on here. Oh, it's off to the side by all the ads. October 24th, 2019 at 9 a.m., in case you're curious about the timeline. But the title is Rent Law's Eviction Window, with eviction window in quotations, created opportunity for LA landlords. I found this article pretty interesting because, again, it shows how for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction of some sort, right? So it says call it a loophole, call it an eviction window, but any way you call it, the months-long delay from when the state legislature passed statewide rent control in September to when newly signed law will take effect on January 1st has created an opportunity for landlords. So if you recall in previous episodes, we talked about a new rent control measure known as AB 1482, which was passed into law on October 8th in California, which has got a few different rent control measures attached to it. But apparently it's saying that some landlords in Los Angeles immediately sent eviction notices to tenants at dozens of apartment buildings to clear out units at below market rates in order to avoid rent caps and tighter restrictions on just cause evictions. So they said that this was actually very different from the way that this was done in New York. So it said that comparing to New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo in June signed the state's sweeping rent reform bill into law immediately after the legislature passed it, and the law took effect immediately after that. So this is where I thought this article gets really interesting, as it explains why California didn't do the same thing. Because I was like, well, they've already seen it rolled out in another state. The other state did it immediately. California doesn't typically strike you as a state to drag their feet on these type of things. They're usually pretty progressive in trying to push, whether it be, pro-tenant or whatever it may be. They seem to move on things. So it turns out that they simply just didn't have the votes. It said that a statewide law can only take immediate effect if it garners 2/3 majority in the state Senate and Assembly. So that is news to me. It said that this bill fell just short in both houses. So in the 40-member Senate, 25 lawmakers voted in favor, falling 2 votes short. And it said in the 79-member Assembly, 48 lawmakers voted in favor, falling 5 votes short. The 5 assembly members also abstained. So there was, 5 members in each that I think abstained means they just didn't vote. This is where Eric gets to admit to you live on the podcast that I'm pretty limited on knowledge. But yeah, abstain is restrain oneself from doing or enjoying something. So 5 senators restrained themselves from enjoying something. So they must have just pled the fifth on that one. So it said that the bill's author, San Francisco Assemblyman David Chu, appeared to have been caught off guard by the landlord eviction move, which is ridiculous. I mean, he should know that this is a possible consequence of this thing happening. I mean, this is what he's in, politics for, is to know these things. And I think when people say they didn't expect that, I mean, there's always some sort of fallout with these type of bills, right? The people are going to try to find the loopholes. So he said there's no reason for landlords to evict tenants in order to skirt the rent cap ahead of January 1st because the bill allows landlords to make a fair rate of return. He called it a shame that some unscrupulous landlords have chosen to exacerbate displacement and homelessness in order to make obscene profits. So I share this with you because it's interesting, recent news that's going into effect in California, but I feel like we also learned a little bit about state policies and the fact that a statewide law can only take immediate effect if it garners 2/3 majority in the state Senate and Assembly. I'm assuming that means both because it didn't say or. I said and Assembly, but yeah, that's interesting to know. So if in the future there are things being discussed in your state and the bill's going to the Senate and the state Assembly, then you have the opportunity that it might be something that's on, I guess, I don't know if there's a standard delay, if I mentioned it earlier, if it's 90 days, but it sounded like it's about a 90-day delay on this one. As opposed to New York State where it went into effect immediately. So if you guys want to check out any of these news stories, I will link to them in today's show notes. Again, this is episode number 283. Some interesting stuff going around on the country, from bed bugs in Philly to ESAs in Michigan and loophole unscrupulous landlords, as it's put, in California. A lot going on. All right, guys. Well, until next week, I hope you guys have a great week and take care.